So today we're going to start a series on budget survival weapons. So what we want to do is find low-cost alternatives that survivalists, preppers, outdoorsmen, people interested in home defense can use during. So what we need to do is have solutions that fit most people, especially people that are unemployed, people that are underemployed, and people that are short on funds, because as the inflation gets worse and worse, you're going to have a harder time feeding yourself, paying your taxes, getting fuel, staying warm. So you will not have the funds to spend on weapons. So what we're going to do is look at alternatives. The first thing we want to look at is the combat shotgun. Now, for our purposes, a combat shotgun can be a riot gun, a slug gun for hunting deer. It can be a full-size hunting weapon with a 28 or 30-inch barrel, because in today's world, you're going to be using whatever it is that you can obtain. And in the used gun market, and also in many communities, there are a tremendous amount of old hunting guns laying around. What I've noticed over the years is a tremendous amount of firearms are purchased, whether they're surplus rifles, hunting weapons, and they kind of seem to fall into the big black hole. And in America, what happens is these things just kind of disappear, and most of them never resurface into the used gun market. And when you look at confiscated weapons and buybacks, just a tiny percentage are destroyed, go to buybacks, or they become parts guns. So we know there's a tremendous amount of pump shotguns and other hunting weapons and semi-automatic shotguns floating around the United States. In some instances, people that don't like guns will give them to you if you are providing a good home and they trust you. In many instances, these can be low-cost purchases. Now, in the last video I did, one of the viewers made a really good point. Buckshot and rifle slugs may not be effective against body armor when you use a center of mass hold. And my response to that is actually a really good point in question, because it brings out into the open the idea that not all armies and combatants use a center of mass hold. And you have to use what you have available against the enemy, regardless of whether they have body armor or not. So when we look at other armies, other police forces around the world, some use a center of mass hold. And those forces have weapons that penetrate body armor. Other forces use a belt buckle or a pelvis hold. And what that does is puts the buckshot into the stomach, the groin, and the knees and legs, which creates a mobility kill. Now, for our purposes, we can't determine whether the enemy's going to have body armor or not, and we have to use what we have. So with shotguns, if it's known that they have body armor, you would use a pelvis or belt buckle hold to deliver your buckshot. That is a front-on shot. Now, if the target is facing to the side from you, you have two alternative holds. One is the high shoulder shot, which would deliver buckshot into the shoulder, arm, neck, and head. Another point of aim is the hip, which would deliver buckshot into the hip and the leg. Now, those are effective for mobility kills. When we're thinking about using combat shotguns, the next big criteria to think about is whether they're extendable magazines or non-extendable magazines. So here I have two different types of shotguns. At the top here we have a Remington 1200 riot gun, and it has a screw-off tube. So the end cap on the tube screws off and you have a retainer for the spring. This retainer can be removed and you can install magazine extensions such as this 7-shot extension on a riot gun, or if you have a sporting gun you can do a 10-inch extension or bigger. So this is a good way to increase your firepower. If you have a family or a group and you use weapons like this, you go from a 5-shot weapon to a 10 or 11-shot weapon. And with a group of 5 people, that gives you 50 more rounds in an initial encounter that you wouldn't have before reloading. That's a significant increase in firepower in an initial contact. That may be critically important because many preppers and survivalists will be breaking contact or defending a fixed position against marauders. So the second type is a non-expandable gun. And we'll look at several different brands of those. This is an old high standard. This one is an NFA item. It's been shortened. But right here, this is what is fixing and holding the magazine tube. And you can see that the way this is mounted, it's not extendable. But what somebody did in the past is they took a high standard and they could not extend it. So this is where this reinforcing lug would go to hold the magazine tube to the barrel. And what this person did is took a Remington 870 extension tube. They took a piece of a magazine tube from an 870 that was scrap, and then they used a electrical conduit as an adapter to make it work. So this is one instance where somebody actually extended a non-extendable magazine tube. So I wanted to show you that as an example. Here we'll give you a close-up. This is the short barrel high standard. It has a screw mounted clamp that goes around the barrel and the magazine tube. The end cap fits inside of here and it's held on by pins or screws underneath of this. So this is not expandable normally. So what somebody did was took a high standard, they removed this clamp. You can see the holes here that hold the end cap using pins or screws. They removed that. They cut a piece of scrap Remington 870 magazine tube, used it to put a Remington 870 magazine extension on. Then they used a piece of conduit as an adapter. Now, if I was going to use this gun in combat, I would go ahead and Loctite this in place so it doesn't move. And I would disassemble the magazine tube using the threads on the 870 portion here in the mag tube to do the takedown and cleaning. Now, they added 2 of these choke clamps to stabilize both the magazine tube barrel and the adapter. So this is one example of what can be done with non-expandable guns in some instances. And we'll move forward and look at some other brands that are not expandable. So now what we're going to do is look at some different brands of pump and semi-automatic shotguns where we cannot extend the magazine tube and increase their firepower. Now, these guns are not useless. They still serve a purpose and they can add to our survival efforts. What will happen with pump shotguns is they will give you a 5-round or 6-round capacity in most cases, or in a few cases you may have an 8-round capacity. So we don't want to exclude these from our survival use. What we want to do is when we're selecting weapons, if we have shotguns where we can expand the capacity, we want to prioritize buying those. But we still want to use whatever it is we can get. So, for instance, all of the Savage Stevens Model 67, Model 77 series, and Savage Model 30 series, none of these guns are expandable. When we look at the Savage and Stevens, what we find is we have a brazed on lug, and the end of the magazine tube is screwed on to this lug. Now, you will find some riot guns that have a 6-shot capacity or a 7-shot capacity, but pretty much most of the Savage Stevens guns will have a 5 or 6-shot capacity. When we look at the popular Mossberg 500 series, we have a screw-off magazine tube. When you take this off, you have a threaded plug, so you cannot extend this. Now, they make riot gun versions. This one is an 8-shot tube. It's not expandable, but with an 8-shot tube, that's a good compromise, and I wouldn't say anything negative about that. Now, when we change our focus from pump shotguns to semi-automatic shotguns, we have an additional limitation on whether they're expandable or not. So with semi-automatic shotguns, the way they mount can limit whether they're expandable. The other thing that can limit whether they're expandable is the design of their gas system. So this one, the gas tube and piston take up half of the magazine tube, which limits it to 2-round capacity in the magazine tube. We'll take this apart and take a closer look at it. And the gas system on this gun limits the expandability of the magazine plug. So when we take this apart and we look at it, what we find is the gas piston assembly occupies the front half of the magazine tube. So this gun holds 2 rounds in the tube and 1 in the chamber for 3 rounds. But I would not discard this from your survival efforts. It will still come in handy. Now, another thing to consider is I found this Winchester 1400, Ted Williams 300 series works well with short barrels with buckshot and slugs. So these are some considerations on selecting combat shotguns when you don't have a lot of money. So in summary, if we can expand the magazine capacity of a sporting or a combat shotgun, that should be our priority for purchase. Otherwise, we use and adapt what is available. Please share your thoughts. We'll see you on the next video.